You know what's strange? A man can spend 20 years building himself, learning restraint, surviving heartbreak, becoming calmer, quieter, more grounded, and still panic the moment a younger woman looks at him with genuine interest. Not lust, not curiosity, interest. Because somewhere deep down, he's already rehearsing the humiliation before anything even happens. She'll lose interest. She probably wants something. She'll wake up one day and realize I'm too old. And if I'm honest with you, most men watching this have never actually been rejected by the woman they're afraid of. They rejected themselves first. So before we go any further, if this conversation already feels uncomfortably personal, subscribe. Not because I'm trying to build an audience, but because there are very few places left where men can hear the truth without being mocked for what they secretly feel. Now, let me tell you something women almost never say out loud. A younger woman does not always choose an older man because he has money, status, or some fantasy lifestyle. Sometimes she chooses him because for the first time in her life, she feels emotionally safe around someone who is not trying to perform masculinity every second. That difference matters more than you think. Younger men often move through relationships like they're standing in front of invisible judges. They need to impress, win, dominate, be desired constantly. Even their affection feels anxious underneath. But an older man who has lived enough life, especially one who has suffered quietly, carries a different emotional atmosphere. And women feel atmosphere long before they analyze logic. She notices how you don't interrupt to prove intelligence, how silence around you doesn't feel awkward, how you don't immediately sexualize every interaction just to reassure yourself you still have it. You think she's noticing your age. Sometimes she's noticing your nervous system. And that realization unsettles men because it destroys the simple story they've been told. You've been taught attraction is mostly visual, immediate, surface level. But women, especially emotionally perceptive women, often experience attraction through emotional contrast. How you make her feel compared to the chaos she's used to. That's why some younger women feel exhausted around men their own age. Not because young men are bad, but because emotional immaturity is loud. And after enough noise, calm starts feeling seductive. You know what really pulls her in sometimes? Your restraint. The fact that you don't need constant validation. The fact that you're not desperately scanning the room trying to prove your value every 5 minutes. Ironically, the older man who thinks he's less desirable is often radiating something far more powerful than he realizes: presence. And presence is rare now. Most people are psychologically fragmented, distracted, performing versions of themselves online all day. Even dating has become branding. But when she meets a man who is deeply present, emotionally contained, observant instead of reactive, it affects her more than she expected. Even she may not fully understand it at first. That's the part men miss. Attraction is not always loud in the beginning. Sometimes it feels like emotional relief, like finally being able to exhale. And if you've ever had a younger woman become unexpectedly attached to you emotionally, not because you chased her, but because she kept returning to your energy, that wasn't an accident. It was psychological. Because what many women crave privately, especially after enough disappointment, is not excitement every second. It's emotional steadiness. And older men who've truly lived, who've experienced loss, responsibility, failure, regret, sometimes carry that steadiness naturally without even knowing it. But there's another reason she chooses you, a darker one, and most men are completely blind to it. Sometimes she chooses you because you make her feel seen in a way men her age never even learned how to do. And no, I don't mean understood in the shallow movie scene version of the word. I mean truly seen. The version of her that's tired, confused, emotionally overstimulated. The version she hides behind confidence, selfies, sarcasm, independence. You notice that version without forcing her to explain it. That affects a woman more deeply than most men realize, especially younger women who grew up in a world where attention is everywhere, but real attention is almost extinct. Think about it. She can post a photo and receive hundreds of reactions in minutes. Compliments, fire emojis, messages, desire. But emotionally, most of it feels empty after a while. Because being wanted and being emotionally understood are completely different experiences. A younger man often responds to her appearance first. An older man often responds to her emotional state first. And when that happens consistently, something shifts inside her. She starts relaxing around you. Not immediately. At first, she may even resist it. She may test you without realizing she's doing it. Pull away slightly, become colder for a few days, mention another man casually, just to observe your reaction. Not because she's manipulative, usually because she's trying to figure out whether your calm is real or just another performance that collapses the moment she stops feeding it attention. Women are constantly studying emotional consistency, especially women who've been disappointed before. And older men often don't realize how attractive emotional stability becomes in a culture addicted to emotional spikes. You answer differently. You react differently. You don't turn every misunderstanding into emotional warfare. That feels rare to her, dangerously rare. But here's where things become psychologically complicated. A younger woman may feel deeply drawn to an older man, while simultaneously feeling terrified by how much influence he has over her emotionally. That contradiction creates tension, because younger relationships are often built around stimulation, validation, momentum, drama. But with you, she starts feeling something slower, heavier, more intimate. And intimacy scares people far more than casual desire ever will. You know why? Because desire can disappear without grief, but emotional attachment changes people. That's why she may suddenly become distant right after moments of closeness. One deep conversation with you may affect her more than 3 months with someone else. And honestly, that scares her. Not because of your age specifically, but because depth creates vulnerability. And vulnerability exposes needs people work very hard to hide. Younger women today are constantly told to appear emotionally untouchable, self-sufficient, unbothered. But underneath that image, many are emotionally exhausted, tired of shallow interactions, pretending to be connection. So when she meets a man who listens carefully, remembers small details, notices emotional shifts without interrogation, it bypasses her defenses. You become psychologically significant before she intends you to. That's why some women suddenly start saying things like, "I don't know why I feel so comfortable with you." That sentence matters because comfort is not casual in female psychology. Comfort is trust beginning to form emotionally before logic catches up. And this is where older men often sabotage themselves. The moment they sense her attachment, they become suspicious of it. They interrogate it, overanalyze it. Or worse, they diminish themselves before she ever gets the chance to choose freely. "You're too young for me. You'll eventually want someone younger. You probably just like the attention." Do you realize what that communicates emotionally? It tells her you don't trust her perception, and women are extremely sensitive to that. A woman can handle complexity. What slowly kills attraction is emotional insecurity disguised as humility. Because the truth is, your age is not always the thing creating distance. Sometimes your fear of your age is. And women can feel the difference immediately, especially emotionally intelligent women. But there's another uncomfortable truth almost nobody talks about. Sometimes she chooses the older man because younger men have never made her feel emotionally feminine. And that changes everything. This part is difficult for some men to hear without misunderstanding it. So listen carefully. When I say a younger woman may feel more feminine around an older man, I'm not talking about control or dependency or some outdated fantasy where she stops thinking for herself. I'm talking about emotional polarity. about what happens psychologically when a woman no longer feels forced to carry the emotional weight of every interaction. A lot of younger women are exhausted in ways they don't openly admit, not physically, emotionally. They're used to conversations where they have to lead the emotional depth, clarify intentions, regulate tension, guess where they stand, decode mixed signals, manage fragile egos carefully so simple honesty doesn't become conflict. After enough experiences like that, she stops relaxing in relationships. She becomes hyper-aware, hyper-vigilant. Even during intimacy, part of her mind stays alert. And then she meets a man who feels emotionally grounded. Not perfect, not emotionless, grounded. A man who doesn't crumble because she disagrees with him, doesn't panic when she becomes quiet, doesn't seek reassurance every 10 minutes through attention, flirting, or control. That emotional steadiness creates a feeling many women secretly crave but rarely describe well. The feeling that she can soften. And softness is deeply misunderstood now. People hear that word and immediately reduce it to weakness. But psychologically, softness is what happens when someone no longer feels emotionally unsafe. It's what happens when her nervous system stops preparing for instability. You notice it in small moments. Her voice changes around you. Her body language relaxes. She stops trying to impress everyone constantly. She laughs more freely. Sometimes she even becomes quieter, not because she's becoming smaller, because she no longer feels emotionally crowded. That shift can create incredibly powerful attachment, especially if she spent years around emotionally chaotic relationships. Now, here's the uncomfortable part. Many older men completely underestimate how attractive emotional leadership can be when it comes from calmness instead of dominance. The internet has poisoned this conversation. Everything became extremes. Either the man is passive and emotionally uncertain, or he's pretending to be some cold, hyper-dominant caricature of masculinity. But real emotional leadership is subtle. It's the ability to remain emotionally centered when tension enters the room. And younger women notice that immediately, because so few people possess it anymore. You know what feels masculine to many women? Not loud confidence, emotional containment. The ability to feel deeply without becoming emotionally chaotic. That's rare, especially now. And ironically, age often teaches men that naturally through suffering, divorce, loss, failure, regret, responsibility, loneliness. Pain matures a man if he allows it to. Not all older men become wiser. Some become bitter. Women can feel that difference too. A bitter older man drains energy from the room. A grounded older man stabilizes it. And stabilization feels incredibly attractive in an emotionally unstable culture. But let me tell you something else women rarely admit openly. Sometimes a younger woman chooses an older man because she feels emotionally protected by his certainty. Not financial protection, psychological protection. His certainty about who he is, what he values, what he tolerates, what he no longer needs to prove. That certainty allows her to stop performing all the time. And performance exhausts modern women more than men realize. So when she feels she can be imperfect around you without instantly losing your respect, attachment deepens very quickly. Because emotionally safe masculinity is rare now. Very rare. But this is also where things become dangerous emotionally for the man. Because once he realizes how deeply she's attached, he often starts doubting the relationship more than she does. He becomes obsessed with the future. What happens when I age more? What if she leaves later? What if I'm only temporary to her? And quietly, without realizing it, he starts sabotaging the very connection she was trying to protect. Not because of reality, because of fear. And fear changes male behavior faster than age ever could. That's the tragedy. A woman can genuinely choose you, sincerely, emotionally, deeply and still lose you to your own inability to believe you were worthy of being chosen in the first place. But there's one vital reason younger women sometimes choose older men. And honestly, it has almost nothing to do with age at all. At some point in life, people stop chasing what looks exciting and start chasing what feels real. That shift happens earlier for some women than men realize, especially women who've already experienced enough emotional disappointment to understand that chemistry alone cannot carry a relationship. Because eventually, the adrenaline fades, the attraction settles, and what's left is the emotional texture of the person beside you. Can you breathe around them? Can you trust their reactions? Do they make life heavier or calmer? That's what starts mattering. And older men often don't understand the power of what they quietly offer when they've built an actual inner life. Not status, not image, inner life. There's a difference. Some men age physically but remain emotionally adolescent forever. Others become deeper. You can hear it in the way they speak, in the pauses they take before responding, in the things they no longer feel the need to prove. A younger woman notices that far more than men think she does, because depth creates emotional gravity, and emotional gravity is incredibly seductive when the world feels shallow. You know what many younger women are secretly exhausted by? Constant performance. Everyone branding themselves, selling themselves, trying to appear unattainable, high value, detached, perfect. After enough exposure to that emotional atmosphere, authenticity becomes magnetic, even if it's imperfect, especially if it's imperfect. That's why a younger woman may feel strangely emotional around an older man who simply behaves honestly. No games, no emotional disappearing acts, no pretending not to care, just grounded honesty. And oddly enough, that can feel more intimate to her than intense romance ever did. Because intensity is easy to fake. Consistency isn't. A man who consistently shows up emotionally creates trust at a very deep level, and trust changes attraction. It transforms it from excitement into attachment. That's the moment many men become confused, because she's no longer interacting with you casually. Now she wants your opinion. Your attention affects her mood. Your silence feels louder to her than she expected. And this is important. Women do not emotionally attach only to beauty, youth, or excitement. They attach to emotional experiences that change how they feel about themselves. That's why some younger women become deeply connected to older men who make them feel calmer, more emotionally secure, more accepted. You become associated with relief from psychological pressure. That's powerful. But there's another layer nobody talks about openly. Sometimes younger women feel emotionally safer with older men because older men are less likely to compete with them. That sentence matters. A lot of younger relationships become subtle power struggles. Who cares less? Who texts last? Who has more options? Who controls the emotional temperature? It becomes exhausting. But emotionally mature older men often stop viewing relationships as competitions entirely. And when a woman no longer feels she has to emotionally wrestle for stability, intimacy deepens naturally. Now, of course, not every age gap relationship is healthy. Some are built on fantasy, escapism, validation, unresolved wounds. Age alone means nothing. What matters is emotional health. A younger woman may be attracted to your groundedness, but if underneath it all you're manipulative, emotionally unavailable, controlling, or desperate for validation, she'll eventually feel that too. Women always feel the emotional truth eventually. Always. And this is the part many men resist hearing. The younger woman who genuinely chooses an older man is usually not looking for perfection. She's looking for emotional congruence. A man whose words, energy, behavior, and emotional presence actually align. That alignment feels incredibly safe, especially in a world full of emotionally fragmented people. And maybe that's why these relationships affect people so deeply when they're real. Because they force both people to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. Her fears, your insecurities. Her vulnerability, your aging. Her uncertainty, your fear of loss. It becomes less about age and more about exposure. Two people seeing each other clearly. And honestly, that level of emotional visibility terrifies most people. Which brings us to the hardest truth of all. The hardest truth is this: a younger woman can genuinely love an older man, and he still may never fully believe her. Not because she's lying, because somewhere inside him, he still sees himself through the eyes of his old wounds instead of through her experience of him. And that quietly destroys more relationships than age ever will. You can feel it when a man starts withdrawing emotionally, right when the relationship becomes real. He becomes suspicious of happiness, suspicious of peace, suspicious of being chosen, as if love must contain hidden danger to feel believable. So instead of receiving her affection naturally, he starts testing it unconsciously. He overanalyzes her behavior, searches for signs she'll leave, turns small emotional shifts into proof of future abandonment. And the tragedy is, the very fear meant to protect him slowly creates the distance he was terrified of in the first place. Because women can feel when a man is no longer present with them emotionally. Even loving women eventually become exhausted trying to convince someone they are sincere, especially when they already chose him freely. Do you understand how emotionally painful that becomes for her? To keep saying in different ways, "I'm here, I chose you, I care about you," while feeling him emotionally drift further away because he cannot reconcile her love with his self-image. That's why confidence in relationships is not about arrogance. It's about emotional receptivity, the ability to let yourself be loved without interrogating every beautiful thing until it dies in your hands. And honestly, many men were never taught that. They were taught how to pursue, perform, provide, compete. But receiving love calmly, trusting emotional intimacy without panic, that's much harder, especially for men who spent most of their lives surviving emotionally instead of feeling safe. So when a younger woman truly chooses an older man for grounded, emotionally healthy reasons, the relationship often forces him into a painful confrontation with himself. Not with her, with himself. Because now he has to ask, can I believe someone sees value in me beyond youth, status, or appearance? That question reaches deeper than dating. It touches identity. And this is why some age gap relationships become unexpectedly transformative for both people involved. Not because they escaped reality, because they were forced to face it honestly. She confronts her emotional needs beyond surface attraction. He confronts whether he believes he is still worthy of deep connection. That's real intimacy, not the fantasy version, the terrifying version. The version where another human being sees your flaws, your age, your fears, your emotional scars, and stays. Do you know how difficult that is for some men to accept? Especially men who secretly believe love has an expiration date attached to masculinity. But here's what I need you to understand before this ends. A woman choosing you is not the miracle. The real miracle is when you stop fighting the possibility that you are actually worthy of being chosen. Because age changes the body. It changes energy, perspective, priorities. But emotional presence, depth, calmness, self-awareness, the ability to make another human feel emotionally safe, those qualities often become stronger with time, not weaker. And women who value emotional depth can feel that immediately. Not all women, of course. People are different. Some relationships won't work. Some attractions are temporary. Some age gaps create real incompatibilities. That's reality. But the connection becomes meaningful when two people stop relating through fear and start relating through truth. And maybe that's the part nobody says enough. The younger woman who truly chooses an older man is rarely choosing a number. She's choosing how she feels in his presence: calmer, safer, more emotionally open, more seen. And sometimes, after years of noise, performance, confusion, and emotional instability, that feeling becomes impossible for her to walk away from.